October 1924, Springfield Armory, Massachusetts. The morning fog hung over the brick buildings of the nation's oldest weapons factory, softening the clang of hammers and the whir of lathes. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of oil, steel shavings, and ambition. Men in coveralls shouted over the noise, moving with the rhythm of industry. In a small, cluttered corner of the workshop, a thin man in round spectacles bent over a bench covered in sketches and parts. His name was John Cantius Garand, a machinist from Quebec who had crossed the border chasing an idea that most engineers called impossible, a rifle that could load and fire itself. He was quiet by nature, his French-Canadian accent faint, his gestures precise. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a politician, but he believed that a single idea, if made real, could change how America fought its wars. "Garand," one of the inspectors called over the din. "You're still chasing that self-loader?" John didn't look up. "Still chasing it," he said. The inspector laughed, shaking his head. "You and your dreams. You'll never make a gas gun work without breaking its guts." Garand didn't respond. He just tightened a spring, adjusted a piston, and ran his thumb along the edge of a new bolt housing. The motion was tender, almost reverent. That year, the U.S. Army had put out an open call for a semi-automatic service rifle, a weapon that could replace the bolt-action Springfield and fire as fast as a soldier could pull the trigger. Dozens of inventors had tried. All had failed. The problem wasn't just complexity, it was durability. Every rifle that had come before jammed, overheated, or fell apart under the dirt and stress of field conditions. When Garand first presented his prototype to the Army board, they called it too fragile, too delicate, unworkable, but Garand refused to quit. By day, he worked through the armory's endless noise and smoke. By night, he returned to his small rented room above a cafe in downtown Springfield. There, under a single flickering bulb, he'd sketch new designs, gas cylinders, recoil springs, feed clips, each iteration moving closer to the weapon he saw in his mind. He didn't want fame. He didn't care for money. What drove him was obsession, to build something that could endure mud, rain, and blood, and still fire true. One evening, while testing a new gas-operated mechanism, the rifle finally cycled cleanly. The bolt snapped back, ejected the casing, and chambered another round in one smooth, flawless motion. Garand blinked, stunned. His hands trembled slightly as he whispered, "She lives." He ran another test, then another. Each time the mechanism worked. In the dim glow of the workshop, surrounded by the ghosts of broken designs, the quiet immigrant from Quebec had done what American ordnance experts said couldn't be done. But his road was far from over. The Army didn't yet believe in his rifle. Rival designers were waiting to see him fail, and Congress, always skeptical of spending, would soon demand impossible results on a shoestring budget. Still, Garand knew what he had seen, and somewhere in that workshop, beneath the smoke and the noise, a legend had just taken its first breath. March 1929, Springfield Armory, Massachusetts. The wind off the Connecticut River carried the smell of melting snow and coal smoke. Inside the armory's long test range, the echo of gunfire rolled like thunder. Shell casings clattered against the concrete floor. John C. Garand stood at the firing bench, his sleeves rolled up, a cigarette trembling between his fingers. On the wooden table before him lay his prototype, a strange, almost elegant rifle of blued steel and walnut. Beside him, 2 Army inspectors watched impassively as he reloaded. "All right, Mr. Garand," one said. "Let's see this miracle of yours work again." Garand exhaled slowly, bracing the weapon against his shoulder. He squeezed the trigger. Bang! Clack! Bang! Clack! The rifle sang each shot, cycling perfectly, brass spinning through the air. The inspectors exchanged quick glances. One stepped forward, checking the mechanism. "Gas-operated, you said?" Garand nodded. "Yes, sir. The gases from each shot push this piston under the barrel. It drives the bolt back, ejects the shell, and chambers the next round. It's simple physics. The other officer frowned. Simple, eh? Then why's everyone else failing at it? Garand allowed himself a small smile. Maybe because they don't listen to the rifle. They stared at him for a moment, unsure if he was joking. He wasn't. For the next 2 hours, Garand fired, disassembled, and reassembled the rifle under watch. When it jammed a rare occurrence, he fixed it in seconds. His movements were methodical, deliberate, born from thousands of late nights with nothing but coffee, blueprints, and his own stubborn belief that it could be done. When the test ended, the Armory's chief engineer, Colonel James Hatcher, approached him. "Garand, I've seen a lot of inventors come through here," he said. "Most can't get through a single clip without something breaking. Yours just fired 50 rounds and didn't flinch." "It rings." Garand nodded, quietly proud. "But," Hatcher continued, "Washington doesn't care about miracles. They care about cost. They'll say it's too complicated, too expensive to produce." Garand's jaw tightened. "Then I'll make it simple, however long it takes." Over the next year, he worked relentlessly. He replaced fragile parts with rugged steel, simplified the gas port, redesigned the trigger group, and invented an N-block clip, a revolutionary 8-round magazine that could be loaded in one motion. The clip would pop out automatically when empty, its sharp metallic ping becoming one of the most distinctive sounds of World War II. But progress came at a price. Funding stalled. The Great Depression strangled military budgets. Washington slashed the Armory's resources, forcing Garand to build with scraps and recycled parts. He often bought his own materials with his meager salary, working nights to file parts by hand. In December 1931, Congress reviewed his work. Lawmakers and generals gathered in a smoky hearing room in Washington. One congressman, skeptical and impatient, leaned forward. "Mr. Garand, are you seriously claiming this contraption of yours will make every soldier in the army shoot faster?" Garand met his gaze evenly. "No, sir," he said. "I'm claiming it'll help them live longer." The room fell silent. Still, the verdict came back cold. Funding was cut again. Production delayed. Rivals whispered that the French-Canadian dreamer was chasing a fantasy that his rifle was unmakeable. But Garand didn't stop. He couldn't. In the frozen winter of 1932, working alone in an unheated workshop, he finally assembled the version that would change history. The gas system was cleaner, the mechanism flawless. The weapon, for the first time, felt alive in his hands, balanced, reliable, and deadly efficient. He fired it into the range wall. The rifle cycled perfectly, once, twice, 10 times. In that moment, the impossible had become real. But now came the greater battle, convincing the U.S. Army to believe it. June 1934, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. The humid air shimmered above the firing range as Army officers gathered behind a line of sandbags. The smell of gunpowder and hot brass hung heavy. On the table before them lay the contenders. 2 experimental semi-automatics, one by John C. Garand and another by the Danish engineer Søren Hansen Bang. It wasn't just a test of weapons, it was a test of faith. John Garand stood silently, his hands folded behind his back, eyes fixed on the range. He wasn't a soldier, but today he felt like one under fire. A decade of work, every design, every sketch, every sleepless night would be judged in the next hour. The ordnance officer in charge barked an order. "Begin the trial." The Bang rifle fired first. Its unusual barrel-mounted gas trap hissed with each shot. 10 rounds later, the weapon jammed. The officer frowned, marking notes on his clipboard. Then came Garand's turn. His rifle, designation T1E2, gleamed in the morning sun, walnut stock, machined steel receiver, and that curious internal clip of 8 30-06 cartridges. Garand stepped forward. "Permission to fire, sir." "Proceed." He shouldered the rifle. A deep breath. The world went quiet. Bang klek, bang klek, bang klek. Each shot echoed downrange, crisp and rhythmic. Spent casings flew in arcs of sunlight. By the 8th round, the rifle ejected the empty clip with a sharp metallic ping. The officers murmured among themselves. Not one jam, not one misfeed. Colonel James Hatcher smiled faintly from the sideline. "That's it, boys," he muttered. "That's the sound of the future." Garand lowered the rifle, exhaling slowly. He'd fired hundreds of thousands of rounds in testing, but never had one string meant so much. The results were undeniable. His design outperformed every rival in accuracy, reliability, and speed. But back in Washington, politics still clouded the decision. Senior ordnance officials were wary of adopting a foreign-born inventor's unproven weapon. Production costs were high. Old generals clung to their bolt-action Springfields, muttering that real soldiers don't need a gas gun. Weeks passed. Then, one summer afternoon, a telegram arrived at Garand's office in Springfield. U.S. Army Ordnance Board recommends adoption of rifle, caliber .30, M1 design by John C. Garand. He read the message 3 times, his hands trembling. After 10 years of doubt, ridicule, and rejection, his unmakeable rifle had just been accepted as the new standard for the United States Army. That night, as the factory workers celebrated, Garand sat alone in his small workshop. He placed the rifle on the table before him, running his hand over the receiver where the words U.S. Rifle Cal. 30 M1 were freshly engraved. He didn't smile. He just whispered, "Now, you must prove yourself." But the hardest test was yet to come. The rifle might have passed in the quiet of a firing range, but soon it would have to survive the mud, blood, and chaos of a world at war. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The sky burned. Black columns of smoke twisted into the heavens as explosions rippled across Battleship Row. The air was alive with the shriek of diving planes and the hammering of machine guns. On Ford Island, young soldiers of the 24th Infantry scrambled for cover, firing blindly at the silver dots overhead. Private Harold Red Jenkins, barely 19, gripped the unfamiliar weight of his M1 Garand, one of the few in circulation before the attack. His heart pounded as he racked the bolt and scanned the sky. "Those aren't drills," someone shouted. "Those are real Jap planes." The Garand barked, 8 sharp cracks echoing through the chaos. Spent shells rained to the pavement, the distinctive ping of the empty clip piercing through the roar. For the first time in its young life, Garand's rifle was speaking for America, and it spoke fast. That day, the M1 saw its first combat. By nightfall, the Navy smoldered, and the Pacific lay in flames. But even amid the ruin, one truth became clear. The U.S. point was at war, and every soldier would soon need a rifle that could endure it. Spring 1942, Springfield Armory, Massachusetts. The once quiet halls now thundered with production. The plant that had built a few thousand rifles a year now aimed for 1,000 per day. Men and women worked side by side, machinists, inspectors, welders, secretaries, all racing to arm a nation awakening from its slumber. John Garand stood on the catwalk above the assembly line, watching rows of rifles roll past beneath him. Each one bore his signature design, his years of stubborn persistence turned into cold, perfect steel. A foreman approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "We're pushing her hard, John. She's holding up better than any weapon we've built." Garand nodded. She was made for this. By late 1942, every new American infantryman carried an M1 Garand. Across the Atlantic, British and German officers still armed their men with bolt-actions relics of the last war. But the U.S. soldier carried something different, a rifle that made him faster, deadlier, and freer. In the deserts of North Africa, Lieutenant George B. Parnell led his platoon through the dunes near Kasserine Pass. When German tanks and infantry struck, his men dug in. The Garands opened up a rolling storm of fire. 8 rounds in seconds. Reload with a slap. Fire again. The Germans couldn't believe it. Reports soon reached Berlin describing an American rifle that fires without pause. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself wrote in frustration, "The American infantryman possesses a fire advantage through his semi-automatic rifle. For the first time in history, an entire army marched with self-loading rifles." Back home, Garand received a letter from a captain who had survived the Tunisia campaign. "Sir, I owe my life to your rifle. It never jammed. It never failed. In the dust and heat, it ran like a machine gun. You have given us a fighting chance." That. Garand placed the letter gently in his desk drawer, beside his earliest sketches from 1924. He stared at the rifle mounted on his wall, the same weapon that had once been called Unmakeable. It had been born in frustration, tested in skepticism, and baptized in fire. Now, it was earning its name in the hands of every young man carrying the hopes of a nation. But as the war widened, the rifle's true legacy would be written not in factories or firing ranges, but across the fields, forests, and shattered cities of Europe. June 6, 1944, Normandy, France, D-Day. The roar of engines and the crash of waves swallowed every thought. The grey dawn over Omaha Beach erupted in thunder as landing craft slammed into the surf, ramps dropping into chaos. Bullets hissed like hornets, slicing through the morning mist. Private Red Jenkins, the same soldier who had first fired the M1 at Pearl Harbor, leapt into the freezing water, his rifle held high above his head. He stumbled toward the sand, mud sucking at his boots, explosions tearing holes in the beach ahead. Men fell beside him. The air reeked of salt, smoke, and blood. And through it all, the Garand spoke. Bangklek, bangklek, bangklek. Each pull of the trigger sent another. 30-06 round hurtling toward the cliffs. The recoil was steady, the rhythm automatic. 8 shots in less than 10 seconds. Reload. Slam the clip. Ping. Continue. Machine gun nests that had survived naval bombardment were now under siege from hundreds of Garands, each one a soldier's heartbeat turned into fire. A British liaison officer watching from a landing craft later wrote, "I had thought our Lee Enfields fast 10 rounds a minute, perhaps, but the Americans, they fired like storm gods." By noon, the beaches began to turn. The M1 Garand had done what no other rifle in the world could do. Keep the advance alive, round after round, without pause, without mercy. August 1944, Saint-Lô, France. The hedgerow war was a grinder. Close combat, short sightlines, ambush after ambush. In that claustrophobic hell, the Garand's balance and speed became the difference between life and death. Sergeant Tom Cafferty of the 29th Division recalled later, "You didn't have time to think. You saw movement, raised your rifle, and the M1 just did the rest. No bolt, no fumbling. It fired as fast as you breathed." The German infantry, armed mostly with the bolt-action Carabiner 98K, found themselves outgunned in every skirmish. They could fire maybe 15 aimed shots a minute. The Americans could fire 40. The difference wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. The M1 gave US infantry the confidence to move under fire, to press forward instead of hunkering down. Even captured German reports acknowledged it. One translated document from the Wehrmacht read, "The American semi-automatic rifle is a wonder weapon. Their infantry is never silent." Springfield Armory, Massachusetts, the same day. Far from the thunder of France, John Garand stood once again on the catwalk of the factory that now pulsed day and night. Each day, over 4,000 M1 Garands rolled off the line rifles destined for Normandy, Italy, the Pacific. A worker handed him one of the finished rifles, its walnut stock gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Garand inspected it carefully. The action clicked with perfect precision. "You must be proud, Mr. Garand," the foreman said. Garand only nodded. "Proud of them," he said, pointing to the workers below, "and proud of the boys who carry it." He knew what his creation had become. Not just a weapon, but a partner reliable, uncomplaining, and deadly accurate. Back in Europe, as autumn fell and the Allies pushed toward the Siegfried Line, the Garand became the sound of liberation. Every forest, every street, Every ruined farmhouse echoed with that rhythmic cadence, bang clack, bang clack. It was the sound of a free army advancing, one that no longer bowed to the slow pace of the bolt. The rifle that America once doubted, that Congress had nearly killed, that rivals had mocked as unmakeable, was now rewriting the rules of modern warfare. And John Garand, the quiet immigrant who had built it in a cluttered corner of a Massachusetts workshop, could only watch as his creation changed the world. December 1944, the Ardennes, Belgium. Snow fell in thick silence over the dense pine forests of the Ardennes. Beneath the stillness lurked the thunder of engines, tanks, half-tracks and artillery. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. Private Red Jenkins, now a seasoned veteran, crouched in a foxhole on the outskirts of Bastogne. His M1 Garand rested across his knees, its metal freezing to the touch. Around him, men whispered prayers, their breath fogging in the cold. Then came the sound, the deep, rising roar of German armor. "Panzer column inbound!" a sentry shouted. The forest erupted. Mortars crashed through the treetops, showering snow and splinters. Jenkins jammed a clip into his Garand, the ping echoing like defiance in the chaos. Bang clack, bang clack. He fired through the blizzard, tracers streaking red against white. The Garand bucked, but never faltered, even as the barrel smoked from the cold. His squad followed suit, dozens of rifles firing in a rolling wave. On the other side of the line, German infantry tried to advance with their Mausers, but every step forward met a torrent of semi-automatic fire. Their officers screamed for covering fire, but it was drowned beneath the relentless rhythm of the M1S. A captured German later told interrogators, "Your rifles, they never stopped. It was as if the Americans had machine guns in every hand." At night, the snow turned pink under artillery flashes. Jenkins huddled in his hole, reloading another clip. The rifle had frost on its stock, ice on its barrel, but when he pulled the trigger again, it still fired. He looked at it and whispered, "Don't quit on me now, old girl." It didn't. Through the freezing nights and desperate firefights, the M1 Garand kept the line alive at Bastogne. The soldiers who carried it no longer thought of it as equipment. It was an extension of themselves, stubborn, unyielding, and utterly dependable. January 1945, Springfield Armory, Massachusetts. Back home, word of the brutal winter battles reached the factory floor. Workers paused to read dispatches pinned to bulletin boards, stories of men in foxholes, of rifles that froze but never failed. A foreman approached John Garand, handing him one such report. "They're saying your rifle's saving lives in Belgium." Garand read quietly. The article described soldiers cleaning their Garands in the snow, melting ice from the barrels with burning rags, trusting the rifle's simple gas system to fire even when machine guns jammed. He folded the paper and said softly, "It's not my rifle anymore." Then he returned to work. The M1 Garand had transcended its inventor. It was no longer a design, it was a symbol, a bridge between factory and front, between immigrant ingenuity and American victory. March 1945, crossing the Rhine. The tide had turned. As US forces stormed the bridges of Remagen, the Garand thundered from rooftops, trenches, and half-tracks. Every riverbank, every farmhouse echoed with that unmistakable sound, steady, confident, mechanical perfection under chaos. General George S. Patton, observing the carnage from his command car, turned to his aide and shouted over the gunfire, "You see that, son? That rifle's the greatest battle implement ever devised." No, he was right. The M1 Garand wasn't just a weapon, it was an equalizer. It gave the ordinary infantryman, the farm boy, the steelworker, the immigrant's son a tool that could match the elite soldiers of Europe's finest armies. And in that equality of firepower lay the essence of democracy itself. When the rifles of the First Army cracked across the Rhine, it wasn't just metal meeting metal, it was freedom, propelled by 8 rounds of 30-06, born from the hands of a man who'd once been told his dream could never be built. The unmakeable rifle had become the unstoppable one. April 1945, Nuremberg, Germany. The city was a scar, its cathedrals hollowed by fire, its cobblestones cracked by tank treads. American infantry moved cautiously through the ruins, rifles raised. Every shadow could hide a sniper. Every basement a last-ditch gun nest. Private Red Jenkins stepped over rubble, his M1 Garand steady in his grip. The smell of brick dust and death hung in the air. Somewhere ahead, a burst of machine gun fire cut through the silence. He ducked behind a fallen wall, heart hammering. His sergeant motioned flank left. Jenkins nodded and crept through a blown-out doorway, boots crunching glass. A figure darted across the far street, a German soldier, desperate, ragged, but still fighting. Jenkins aimed. The Garand cracked once. The man fell. Smoke drifted from the barrel. Jenkins stared for a moment, then exhaled. He'd fired this rifle in jungles, in mud, in snow. Now, in the ruins of the Reich, it fired as cleanly as ever. The war was ending, but the rifle had one last job to do. May 8th, 1945, Reims, France. Germany surrendered. Bells rang, horns blared, and exhausted soldiers poured into the streets. Some danced, some wept. Many just sat down and stared at the horizon, trying to understand how it was over. Red Jenkins leaned against his Sherman truck, his Garand across his lap. The stock was nicked and darkened by sweat, the metal worn smooth by months of use. He ran his thumb along the receiver, tracing the stamped letters. U.S. Rifle, Cal, 30, M1. A machine built by men he'd never met, people in faraway factories who'd never seen combat, but whose work had saved his life 100 times. He whispered quietly. She made it through. August 1945, Springfield Armory, Massachusetts. The war ended. The great machines slowed, the furnaces cooled. After nearly 6 million rifles, production lines went quiet for the first time in years. In his office overlooking the now silent floor, John C. Garand sat at his drafting table, a cup of cold coffee beside him. The news from Japan had arrived that morning. Atomic bombs, surrender, peace. He wasn't a man for speeches, and he hadn't sought recognition, but he felt it an immense, quiet pride that his rifle had carried America through the greatest war in history. A young officer entered the room. "Mr. Garand, the War Department's sending a commendation. They're calling your rifle the backbone of victory." Garand looked up slowly. "It wasn't the rifle," he said. "It was the men who trusted it." The officer hesitated, then nodded. "Even so, sir, they say every soldier remembers the sound of that ping." Garand smiled faintly. "So do I." Numpsing. He walked to the window. Outside, sunlight glinted off the rows of rifles stacked for storage, steel and wood now at rest. He thought of the journey. From a lonely workshop to the beaches of Normandy, the snows of Bastogne, the ruins of Berlin. He thought of every man who had carried one, every moment when that rifle had meant the difference between life and death. And for the first time in 20 years, John Garand allowed himself to stop working. He removed his glasses, set them on the table beside his blueprints, and whispered, "You did your duty." The M1 Garand had fired its final wartime shot, but its echo would last for generations. Spring 1952, Springfield, Massachusetts. The world had changed. The flags of victory had been folded, the soldiers gone home, and a new war, the Cold War, cast its long shadow. But in the museum hall of the Springfield Armory, sunlight still gleamed off rows of M1 Garands standing at attention, silent and immortal. Visitors moved through the displays, veterans with canes, young cadets in crisp uniforms, families reading the plaques beneath each rifle. At the far end of the room, a grey-haired man in a simple brown suit stood quietly, hands folded behind his back. His glasses glinted under the skylight. It was John Cantius Garand. He had retired now, his hands stiff from years of work, but his mind still restless. As he gazed at the weapon that bore his name, a young boy approached, tugging at his father's sleeve. "Dad," the boy whispered, "that's the man who built the rifle that won the war." Garand smiled faintly. "No, son," he said softly. "The men who carried it won the war. I just built something they could trust." The father nodded in respect. "Still, sir, what you built changed everything." Garand looked down the row of rifles, each identical yet unique, each carrying invisible ghosts of the men who had held them from Omaha Beach to Okinawa, from Bastogne to Berlin. Elsewhere in the world, the M1 Garand was still at work. American troops carried it into Korea, where its 8-round rhythm echoed once more across frozen hills. Allied nations adopted it, trained with it, trusted it. Even enemies studied it, copied it. The rifle born from one immigrant's persistence had become a global symbol of precision and reliability. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't fragile. It simply worked every time. April 1974, Connecticut. In a quiet house not far from where his first prototypes had been built, John C. Garand passed away at the age of 86. There was no parade, no ceremony, no fortune left behind. He had never patented his rifle for personal profit. But in armories, museums, and living rooms across America, the weapon that bore his name remained. To this day, many who hold one still remark that it feels alive, as if the steel remembers its purpose. A few years later, a letter from a World War II veteran was found in the Armory archives. It read, "Mr. Garand, I never knew your face, but I knew your rifle. It never failed me once. When the world was on fire, I could trust it more than I could trust myself. You gave every soldier a fighting chance, and for that, sir, we thank you." In the end, that was John Garand's true legacy. Not wealth, not fame, but the lives saved by his stubborn faith that the impossible could be made real. The rifle that experts called Unmakeable became the heartbeat of a generation, the first truly modern infantry weapon, the bridge between bolt-action tradition and the automatic age. And long after the last shell casing fell silent, its echo endured in the cadence of history itself. Bang, clack, ping, the sound of freedom being forged by an immigrant's hands.